don't see very many from Marina, but I don't know that many either.
All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting, board workshop for the Board of Directors of the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. Thank you for coming. Arlene, may we have roll call?
Director Evans?
Here.
Director Edwards?
Here.
Director Riley?
Here.
Director Byrne?
Here.
Director Hoffman?
Here.
Director Adams?
Here.
And Director Potter?
Here.
All present.
Thank you. If you'll stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you all for coming tonight. I have a few housekeeping items I'd like to go over. There are some restrooms that I know of anyway, on the far side of the room outside. And I would like to let everyone know that there are assisted listening devices available in the back of the room. We also have headsets for Spanish language translation, also in the back of the room. We do have translators at the table to the right, Joseph Harvin and Lupita Jaime.
Tenemos traducción al español, Joseph Harben y soy Lupita Jaime. Quien necesite ayuda en español, por favor tomen unos audífonos, los tenemos en una mesa a la entrada.
Thank you. We are going to accept public comment tonight at the end after all the presentations have been given. There are speaker cards at the table at the front, also with staff on the sides of the room. If you would like to speak at public comment, please fill out a speaker card. We'll be collecting them throughout the night, and then we'll be calling you up to speak once the presentations are through. But we will start out with oral communications. If anyone wishes to address the board on anything that is not on tonight's agenda, you have 2 minutes to do so. Please approach the microphone.
Good evening, members of the district. Jeff Davey, lifelong resident of Monterey Peninsula. And I'm here tonight to talk to you about something that I'm getting more and more concerned about as I learn more and more about it. Anyone who attended the Monterey One Water meeting last week, and anyone who's aware of well, before I say that, this board is on the record supporting the desal project, and so is Monterey One Water. And I think it's unfortunate that there's some effort that seems to be behind the scenes to convince the Coastal Commission otherwise, and that's evident in the Wellington report, which you all, I hope, have seen by now. It talks about the district's documents being manipulated and presented in an effort to, I think, in my opinion, convince them that we don't need desal. There's also public record of the general manager for Monterey One Water going to the Coastal Commission and speaking specifically about how we don't need desal anymore. Both these things without the board's approval. You're a partnership with that board in that project, in the overall project, the Monterey One Water project as well as the desal project. And I think it's incumbent on you as the directors of this organization to not allow those things to happen. And if it's happening internally, to do something so it doesn't continue, and if it's happening with your partner, to make sure they do something so it doesn't continue. I don't think it's appropriate, and I just think you should do something to stop it. I have no problem with people disagreeing with me. People disagree with me all the time. People disagree with me right now. But it's the process and it's how we do things. I think we can all treat each other fairly and respectfully, and I think it's important that we put an end to that sort of thing. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davey.
Michael Bear. I've now been working on Monterey local water issues for 6 years. Started November of 2013, Carmel Middle School, Measure O. That was my first introduction. And I've probably been to close to 100 meetings between Water District, cities, Coastal Commission, Public Utilities Commission. I've gone to a lot of meetings. And one of the biggest arguments is we have the most expensive water in the country, and it's a hardship on the residents. And it divides our community basically between the business, hospitality, tourism, real estate, chambers of commerce, and local people who give water bills that many people struggle to pay. And I just think I don't know what the word is, it's too bad that never in any of those meetings, since we're divided, has the other side, the business commercial interest, ever expressed any acknowledgement of the hardship that residents face. Not once have I ever heard that.
Thank you, Mr. Bear.
Good evening, I'm Peter Kaiser from Seaside. I believe this board has some unfinished business that we've been trying to correct for decades. Some of these are, we've been suggesting storage ponds at Fort Ord and other open areas to catch the rainwater before it runs down into the ocean. This has not been done, as I understand it. We've been asking for you to clean out the Los Padres Dam, all of the mud, so we have 100% use of that dam now. We lost San Clemente already. And we don't want anyone charged for using less water, doing the conservation that's being asked for, and we're not being charged for that. Also, we don't want sewer water being treated and put down into the water table, calling it pure water, and then that's supposed to be our future drinking water. We never voted on this. Also, we want no use of eminent domain, except for maybe freeways or something like that, but not taking over legitimate corporations. And also, we want to make sure that any new expenses that the ratepayers have to pay will be voted on in a general election for the 40,000 ratepayers. We believe we should have to pay for anything like purchases or whatever, raising the rates. We should vote on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaiser.
Melody Crislock, Public Water Now. I want to clear the record, especially for the press. The management of Monterey One Water did not say what Jeff Davey just accused him of saying. That was a mistake in the record, and it's been clarified. It wasn't Paul Sciutto who made any statement to that effect. I'm really sorry to see this whole thing with the simple, logical expansion of Pure Water Monterey.
Like it. So, again, the individuals at Monterey One Water who are advocating strongly about the Coastal Commission decision, we're doing it because they're looking out for North County, which is going to be in trouble if the deep wells get exhausted. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Urigi, founder, Coalition of Peninsula Businesses. I've been involved with this for the last 10 years as a volunteer. I think I know quite a bit about the water project, the CPUC proceedings, what's now occurring at the district, and what's now occurring at M1. The comments made earlier by Melody are incorrect. I'm looking at a correspondence from the Coastal Commission and the ex parte meeting that did take place with the Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Mittens, and Mr. Sosetto of Pure Water Monterey, where they are up there at the Coastal Commission staff and commissioners stating that the Pure Water Monterey expansion is in fact a project. I didn't know projects became projects with a draft EIR and a draft report. That I believe does not quite jive with how everything has taken place over the years. And the resolution by the M1 board, the two last meetings I was at, was very clear. It is not there as an alternative project or replacement. It is strictly there for backup. And the whole purpose way back when in the March meeting from the M1 board, which I think all of you are well aware of, is strictly to get the project, the EIR, done, put it on the shelf, and in case DSAL did not make it, we would have some water potentially with the expansion as needed to keep us away from the CDO. Cal-Am, in their good heart, which I'm not sure why they did it, also agreed to pay for it, as did the district. but not as a replacement project, not as an alternative project. That has clearly stated in M1's board's resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Narigi.
Good evening. My name is Paul Bruno. I'm a resident of Monterey. I serve on your Ordinance 152 Oversight Committee, and I also serve as the chair of the Seaside Groundwater Basin Water Master. But my background is I'm actually a CPA, so I have a financial and business background. I just want to remind this board about its unfunded pension liabilities, its unfunded retiree benefits, and I would say basically a precarious financial position that I believe this organization is in. So as whenever you venture forward, remember who you are and remember your liabilities. Those will come back and bite you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno.
Good evening, Board. My name is Carlos Ramos, and I'd like to set the record straight on a comment, actually two of them, but the first comment that gives the perception that the minority community, specifically the Latino community, has not been involved. There was a coalition by the Latino Water Use Coalition, the Latino Seaside Merchants, and Comunidad Unidad, which are parents, specifically at MPWMD, Latino parents that understood and still understand what is happening with the water issue. Did everybody participate in trying to diminish water use? Yes. But are they in support of moving forward? They did so many years when we had an opportunity with that dam. But that was shot down twice. And this is for people that have barely gotten here, 5, 6, 7 years. Try 15 years, right here. And all of the manipulating and use of media and use of the internet to try to bamboozle the minority communities. Yes, in addition to those groups, there's been outreach to the African American, Filipino communities in order to better understand what the issue is. So for anyone to say that the minorities have been forgotten and only one side has been speaking up for them, shame on them, and shame on each one of you if you believe that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos. I'm going to close public comment or oral. Okay. Great. Please, Mr. Turner.
I wasn't planning on speaking, but the first speaker said that there's been something going on behind the scenes to try to screw up the desal, and no, I disagree with that. It's not behind the scenes at all. We've been very upfront. Desal is going to kill us. Cal-Am's desal. Now, maybe at some point in the future, if we had a regional desal, a public regional desal, if we felt we needed that, that'd be a good idea. But it turns out that Cal-Am's desal paid off over the 30 years with the interest on the loans will be $2.1 billion. That's with a B, dollars. That's a lot of dough. Whereas the expansion of Monterey One's pure water system would be only about $200 million over 30 years, 1/6. We gotta be crazy to go with Cal-Am's desal. Also, interesting what's happening, the Public Utility Commission went to the Coastal Commission staff after the Coastal Commission staff advised their commissioners to throw Cal-Am's desal into the dumper. And PUC said, "Well, wait a minute. We found there are technical questions." There had no technical questions when Cal-Am had no water rights. They had no questions when the Stanford study showed that Cal-Am would be taking fresh water. All of a sudden, there's technical questions. And so the CCC is not going to make a decision on Thursday. The whole point of this delay is to explain to the staffers on the CCC that they'll get fired if they don't change their report and advise the commissioners to go with the desal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. I'm going to close oral communications, but before I do so, I do have one speaker card that was specifically for oral communication. Brian Clark? Oh, it is after? Okay, then we'll save that for next. Okay, I will close oral communications and turn it over to our General Manager, Dave Stoll.
Well, thank you, and welcome, everybody. I'm the warm-up act. Try to get you all in the mood. So what I'm going to cover specifically, or what we're going to cover collectively, is introduction to the team. I know there's been some impatience with learning who all our consultants are, and today, in addition to the two you've already learned about through the staff note, you'll learn everybody. We're going to review feasibility criteria. What does feasible mean? At least where has that taken our board? Overview of the process that has brought us here, and then we'll introduce Reftelis, our primary consultant on the preliminary valuation cost of service study. Then after that, I'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about community exposure to financial risk going forward, what the next steps might be, and then we'll take public comment. And if time permits, we'll address some of the questions raised in public comment. If time does not permit, then we'll accumulate all of those and put a written response together and post that on the website and make available in other ways. So looking at the introductions to our team, basically you can categorize them by certain questions that we had to ask. And so in December of last year, we hired a very professional and preeminent firm on, well, how does eminent domain work? What are the steps? What are the pitfalls? How do you prepare yourself to be ready if eventually the road takes you there? And that's Rutan and Tucker. I'll talk a little bit more about them in a second. Then the question is, what is it worth? And will it save money? And that's Reftelis, one of the nation's, it's a nationwide preeminent financial consulting firm for infrastructure. They've done hundreds of cost of service studies, valuation studies. This is their sweet spot and work primarily with public agencies. So we're very pleased to have them on our team. Then the question is, can you finance it? You may have noticed that there's a note, an attachment to the staff note in the package 2B, and that's Barclays. We'll talk a little bit more about Barclays in a second, but included in there was a highly confident letter. What that means is, as investment bankers who've seen this type of thing before, they have opined that given traditional bond covenants, that this can be financed off the revenues of the enterprise within rates, so we don't have to go down a different path of looking for general obligation bonds or separating your bill from where you pay for it. It would all be in the bill, and that's basically what's reflected in their letter. Then the question is, well, how do we operate it? What are the costs? What are the savings? What's the best way to get at that? And this is Close and Associates, who had extensive work with the infrastructure finance area of HDR Engineering, now out on their own, and somewhat experienced with water on the West Coast in the investor-owned utility setting. Then we examined the district's authority to issue debt, and that's Norton Rose Fulbright, our long-standing bond counsel firm. Basically, it's been involved in the district about the time I first got involved, in 1992, with the Pebble Beach Reclamation Project, and has been our bond counsel since then. And then finally, what Proposition 218 issues under public ownership might come home to roost that makes it different than private ownership? And again, we've got Michael Colantano, who's one of the preeminent League of Urban Cities, special districts, Prop 218 experts in the state. And that's been our team to date with our internal team, our CFO, our district council. And we've been meeting basically as a group since February. And then this team is such a set of all-stars that they could break into smaller groups and work with each other. And I think we've all been very impressed with the outcome. So a little bit more on the team. So here are some recent municipalizations of investor-owned utilities, some of which you may know about, some perhaps not. 2017, Casitas basically acquired the Ojai system from Golden State Water. And our law firm Rutan Tucker worked on that project. Also in 2017, Missoula, Montana, purchased from Liberty Utilities for just under $100 million. And our investment banker and our investor-owned utility consultant worked on that project. Apple Valley, currently in front of a bench trial. Our investor-owned utility consultant is working on that with several different areas of services. And then way back in time, it seems, 2008, those of you who went through the campaign heard the name Felton until you were numb. But Rutan Tucker worked on that project as well. So we've got a team that is not new to this territory, very deep in terms of bench and very knowledgeable in terms of expertise. Turning our attention a little bit to feasibility, the interesting part of all this and what caused all of this expenditure of funds and pulling together this all-star team was the public initiative process basically created a law. That's the way California initiative process works, and that law created an ordinance that we had to adopt on our books, created a new rule, Rule 19.8, and part of Rule 19.8 said, it shall be the policy of the district to secure and maintain public ownership of all water systems. Keyword, if and when feasible. So we all look at each other and we say, what does this mean? What's that going to specifically mean to us? And the board, through its process, basically broke it into 4 pieces that can be summarized as it's not feasible if you can't get through a bench trial. And a bench trial is where your right to take, basically the public necessity, is determined. And we said, well, that's going to be based on the cost to ratepayers, quality and delivery of service, governance and transparency, and legal permissibility. So those are kind of the 4 areas which we've set out to say, if we can demonstrate a better level in each of these, or in a majority of these, then perhaps there is, in fact, it's in the public's interest to take the system. Well, of course, a month ago, as we were looking at kind of wrapping this thing up, we went back to the initiative, and we also discovered the part that didn't end up in law was Section 2, the purpose. The purpose of this measure is to look at these things to the extent financially feasible. So the framers of the initiative did have financial feasibility in mind. I think our board, rightfully so, has said, well, let's look at operations, let's look at governance, let's look at legal permissibility. But it really was intended to be a financial exercise. So going back over a chart that you've seen, for any of you who went to the listening sessions all the way back in January, this is basically the process in a nutshell. You come in and you look and you say, what is that system worth? What's its value? Okay, if I have to buy it, convert it to a mortgage, and now see if I can afford the mortgage. And the way you do that is you look at the overall cost of service of operating the system, you take some things out, you put some things in, the new mortgage, some changes in operations and so forth. And if you have savings, then financially it is feasible. And John's going to really go through this whole process for us in a minute. Recent statements about the study, though, said things like, even at their estimate, meaning us, or HIB, the cost would equate to tens of thousands in expense per household with interest. And that was in last Thursday's Herald. And then, water bills will greatly increase for customers. It was on KSBW last Thursday. That's nonsense, and that's not the way it works. You may remember this mailer that ended up in recycle bins. The rule of thumb is, if it costs more, it is not feasible. So the whole starting point for this exercise is, there's not an increase to ratepayers to pay the massive debt. There's not additions that are put on your shoulders as a burden. If it doesn't pencil out as a reduction in overall cost, then it is not feasible. And let me just demonstrate a little bit to what is meant by that. This is graphical. Don't try to pull numbers off these pages. John's work is the one to pull numbers from. But basically, this is what you pay for in your current rates: the cost of service, the cost of operating the system, labor, pension, and benefits, purchased water, power, and chemicals, other O&M, administrative and general, overhead, if you will, general taxes like payroll and franchise taxes, annual capital additions, investment in the system, There's the state revolving fund desal debt, so the desal project, if it goes forward, hopefully it would have a piece of public debt in it. There's what's called CalAm General Office Allocation. This is for services provided to the local system from the statewide company. There's the service company, which is the parent company in New Jersey, providing services, not just from New Jersey, but billing and lockbox clearing and so forth on collections nationwide, customer service calls. There are acquisition premiums, so when the company goes out and acquires another water system, that premium for acquisition is rolled into your rates statewide. There's tank painting amortization, as small as this is, but you do some O&M that is actually kind of a capital investment, and so you amortize that tank painting. There's the San Clemente Dam that we're still paying a portion of as a regulatory asset. There are property taxes for the infrastructure. There's depreciation for that same infrastructure. There's income taxes on the revenues received before releasing shareholder return. And then there's the return on rate base. It's all of those things that comprise your current cost of service under an investor-owned utility model. If it were to be acquired publicly, there are things that you do not have to pay for under public ownership. The return on rate base comes, so that's the total cost, as I said. So the return on rate base would come off under public ownership. Income taxes comes off. Depreciation comes off. Property taxes comes off. San Clemente Dam comes off. Some of these you may have to compensate upfront in the purchase price and the value, but they come off of your annual payment obligation. Tank painting, acquisition premiums, the service company, and general office allocation. So then you say, going back to that three-step chart, okay, well, where's my cost of acquisition? Where's my new mortgage? And basically, you add that back on top, and then you compare the two, and you say, was my total cost of service under the investor-owned utility greater than, equal to, or less than the total cost of service under public ownership? And that's the cost of service analysis. And if it's not less than, dialing back to the basic principle, rule of thumb, then it's not financially feasible. So with that, I want to turn it over to John Mastraccio from Reftelis to kind of walk you through how we got to where we are with the report and dazzle you.
Thank you. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the two major components of our work, which was the valuation assessment and the cost of service analysis. Dave spent some time talking about the purpose and objectives. I'll go light on that piece and get right into the meat of the analysis. Essentially, what we as David mentioned, what we were doing was to identify the financial or economic feasibility of public ownership of the Monterey water system. We completed a preliminary valuation assessment because that's a key input into the cost of service. And then we compared the cost of continued private ownership with the cost of the district taking over and owning and operating the system. Our process consisted of taking publicly available information, analyzing that information, preparing a forecast of continued ownership and operation by California American, completing the valuation assessment, and then factoring that valuation assessment into the financial forecast under district ownership. And then comparing the district ownership cost with the CalAm ownership cost and looking at what that might look like from a customer bill and ratepayer impact perspective. So let me start with the valuation assessment. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do the valuation assessment and what the results are. So we use three methods of valuing the water system. These are industry-accepted methods. They're approaches that are used for valuing water systems, for valuing businesses, for valuing assets that are public utility-related assets. So there's the income approach, the market approach, and the cost approach. So I'm going to talk about each of these three, talk a little bit about the theory behind it just briefly, and then show you the results of the valuation assessment. So the first is the income approach. The income approach is an approach where you look at the earnings or the cash flows of the potential business that you're looking to acquire. You look at the future earnings every year, and you bring those future earnings back to the present value, and that represents the value of the system under that method. When we do this for the Monterey water system, we take into account that California American Water is regulated by the CPUC, and they're allowed to earn a certain rate of return on their assets or their rate base. And that primarily dictates the earnings in the system that we're looking at and using as part of the valuation. Currently, Calium is allowed to earn a rate of return on its assets of about 7.61%. And again, that's the basis for these earnings projections. In addition, our analysis includes recurring capital investment into the system, which is a cash flow need, but it also results in additional rate of return into the future. And then finally, just a point that we did look at the desal plant. We've captured that into our valuation estimate. We kind of segregated that. We started with the base system and then layered on top of it the value of the desal plant. So what you see here are two value estimates. There are two different sub-methods within the income approach. One is looking at the future cash flows over a 20-year period, bringing them back to present value and factoring in a terminal value. And the second method is just a single period. What are the earnings? And you assume that those earnings are going to continue into the future. And so you get two different answers when you do those two different methods, but on average, this value comes in at around $238 million. And this is the value without the desal plant, which I'll add on in just a few minutes. The market approach. The market approach is where you look at comparable sales that have happened in the industry of like systems or like assets, and you equate that value to an equivalent for the Monterey water system. Unlike the housing market, which there's tons of transactions that happen in a given year and lots of comparables to draw upon, in the water industry there are very few of these transactions to utilize. But for the ones that are available to take a look at, we correlate those purchase prices to some of the value drivers that cause the price to be higher or lower. And some of those value drivers include the number of customer connections. So the bigger the system, the larger the value. The earnings, and so if earnings are high or low, the value is going to be high or low. The net book value is related to the original cost that it takes to install the assets, and that's another driver of what the value of the system might be. And then rate base is a regulatory word. It basically means the ability of the water system to earn a rate of return on their unrecouped investment. And that rate base value is another driver for the value of the system under the market approach. So we looked at each one of these four drivers for other sales transactions that have occurred in the industry. This table is just a shortened example of some of the transactions that have happened in the past in California. So we have a purchase price, we have a number of connections, and so we're able to calculate a price per connection. Same thing with the net book value or the net asset value or original cost value. We can look at the price compared to that original cost value. We can look at the price compared to earnings and come up with a multiple. And so what we found in doing this type of market approach is that there's a lot of variability in the price multiples that we gain from these recent transactions, and that required us to weight the transactions that happened in the marketplace and weight the most relevant ones. So when we did that, under the four drivers that we looked at, there was a wide range of value that came out of that. So you can see the low end is around 185, the high end is about 372, with an average of around 270 million. So we took this variability and the limitations that are present in the market in terms of the number of transactions into account when we valued the system. And then third, we looked at the cost approach. And the cost approach is basically valuing the system by looking at each and individual component of the system. So we looked at the number of and miles of pipe in the system, the treatment facilities, pump stations, and added up the value of each of those components. And under this method, we look at the replacement cost or the reproduction cost of those assets, add them up, and then deduct the what we call depreciation, but it's basically looking at the remaining useful life of the assets. And so when you do that, under this approach, we have a original cost less the amount of the assets that have been used up of about 222 million. That's the original cost. And then when you convert that to a reproduction cost less depreciation, that number on the right here is around 464 million. And the next thing we did for the cost approach is we looked back at those market transactions and we said, based on the prices that other systems have sold, do they come close to the replacement cost, new less depreciation value? And what we found in the market is that the replacement cost, new less depreciation value in most cases is more than double what the sales price was. And so that factor that the market really doesn't bear the value of the system using this cost approach caused us to weight this methodology much less than the other methods. So in essence, this is how we took all of those approaches and combined them. So we took the income approach and those two methods that I mentioned, weighted that at 80% of the value. We took the sales comparisons approach, which again, limited number of sales, a lot of variability in terms of what the prices are for the sales that we did have, weighted that much lower at of those four sub-methods, 5% each or 20% total. And the cost approach we gave no weighting to because of the market transactions don't bear any relationship to the RCNLD value. So combining all that, we come up with a base value of about 245 million. We then, based on that $245 million of base cost, we then look to what other asset value do we need to incorporate into the final valuation number. And so currently there's some construction work in progress. Those are ongoing projects that haven't been completed, but we want to reflect the value of those projects as well. So we have some about $2 million of construction work in progress. We also have a portion of the pipeline and pump station, which is not in the Monterey pipeline and pump station, which is not in the base valuation estimate. We have the desal plant, and we show 92.7 million added for the desal plant, knowing that the desal plant cost is around 313 million. There is some, as David mentioned, there's some public agency financing associated with that. So in addition to our valuation estimate, we've assumed that the district would take over that debt service. So we have about $180 million of additional debt obligations that we assume the district would take over and I'll show you that in our cost of service analysis. So the additions total about $114 million, brings the value up to $359 million. And then we also add to that, there's some costs that CalAm has already incurred under their under regulatory approval. They have not been recouped. They haven't recouped those costs, but they're entitled to recoup those costs if they were to remain the owner and operator of the system. So there's the potential that the district would have to compensate for those items as well, and that totals about $155 million. So when you add all that together, we're at about $513 million for the system with those additional items added. So from there, we go into the cost of service evaluation. And just a real quick snapshot of our process there. Again, we're using information that's publicly available. We've prepared a projection of cash flow, revenue requirements, and what that means for ratepayers and customers of the system under continued CalAm ownership. We then, as David alluded, there's some additions and subtractions in terms of costs of service. Factor that in addition, layer the financing of the value of the system on top of that, and then look at the annual differences in revenue requirement under CalAm continued ownership versus district ownership. So that was our process. We actually looked at 3 different scenarios. First scenario is just status quo, continued CalAm ownership. Scenarios B and C are district ownership scenarios. One is with district staff operation and maintenance of the system, and then scenario C is with a contract operator. And there's some cost differences associated with that. The analysis is based on a number of estimates, and one of the key estimates is when you take that $513 million of purchase price estimate and the district finances that, what does that translate into an annual revenue requirement? And so based on information provided by Barclays, one of our teaming partners, we are using a 4% interest rate and a term of 30 years. That would be that purchase price would be amortized over that 30-year life. In addition to that, there will be periodic reinvestment in the system, and we've assumed $14 million a year of rehab replacement of aging infrastructure. And then we have also assumed that there would be no district payment of property taxes or payment in lieu of taxes. And then again, I mentioned earlier about the desal plant and the district taking on the public and state revolving loan fund debt that would go along with that facility, and that is also built into the cost of service evaluation numbers. So wanted to revisit the reasons why there's cost of service differences when you look at CalAm ownership and you look at the district ownership, and this is similar to the bar charts that David showed, but in a little different format. So the first difference in cost is what I refer to on this chart is cost of money or amortization differences. So it's essentially taking that $514 million, which CalAm will get recovery from, and they will also earn a rate of return on the majority of that at about 7.6% interest rate. Capture that in a purchase price, and then the district refinances that at a lower interest rate of 4%. And that produces about $12 to $13 million of annual savings. So that's one of the big savings that's included in the cost of service analysis. Secondly, the district doesn't pay income taxes or property taxes. That's about in 2023, it was the first year of our projection, that's about a $10 million savings. There are differences in general office overhead, general expenses. That was an additional savings of about $7.7 million. Some regulatory expense reductions, $360,000. And then there's some additions. So there's some additional benefits cost difference that adds a little bit of cost, and then some contract services and insurance costs that add a bit to it. And then the big bar at the bottom is the cost of cash funded capital. This is annual recurring capital reinvestment in the system that under district ownership that would be most likely paid as they go, rather than financing that and building that into another bond issue. On the CalAm side, that rolls into rate base and gets amortized over the rate base period at about a 7.6% rate of return. So it's that difference between annual recurring capital that's built into rates versus amortizing it under a different approach. So those are the major differences in terms of cost of service. When you look at what this looks like from an annual savings, we show ratepayer savings right from the start, or revenue requirement savings right from the start of about it's about 13.6 million, and then the dollar amount changes over time. Under the scenario where the district owns and operates it without a contract operator, that's the difference between the green line and the orange line shown on the chart here. That's roughly a 12% difference in cost of service. So if you want to translate that into a customer bill, assuming the water rate structure doesn't change, you would be looking at about a 12% reduction in your bill. Under the contract operations scenario, it was a little bit more expensive for the district, but we're still showing a little over $10 million of annual savings starting in 2023, which was our first year of the projection, and then that savings corresponds to about a 9% savings instead of that 12% that we show under the non-contract operations scenario. So those projections also continue moving forward. So based on that, quick summary of what's in the preliminary evaluation and cost of service report, our conclusions were that the acquisition of the system appears to be economically feasible. There's certainly more work to be done to move forward, but based on the information that was available up to this point, that was our conclusion. And I know Dave's going to talk a little bit about some next steps and where they go from here.
Dave, before you begin, if you have filled out a speaker comment card and you would like to, or your speaker card, you'd like to be a speaker and you still have your card, would you please pass it to the outsides of the rows where staff can come through and pick them up and get them to me? And if you would like to be a speaker, there's still time to fill out a card. Once Dave finishes his last presentation, I will collect all the speaker cards, and we'll open the floor for comment.
Well, I want to thank John for making a very complex subject seem so easy. And I did want to point out a couple of things that may have been lost in translation. By district operations, that's the scenario where we integrate with existing CalAm employees. So that would be all the folks who really know the system are available to join in the operations. Contract operations means for whatever reason those employees are not available, And for the purposes of pumps and pipes and water quality and fleet management, certain functions would be shopped out to a third-party operator, and there are firms that do that and do it quite well, but you pay a little more, basically an internal rate of return on that. So I want to talk a little bit about money because this is not free, and it's our money collectively, and I want to make sure you understand that it's being well spent on a very tall task. We originally said it would cost probably about $750,000 to get to this point. We're actually at the end of this point. Reftelis's appearance here is kind of the last billable topic, we think, on this first phase. We budgeted $650,000. To date, we've expended about $530,000. We expect to spend the rest, and kind of projecting where we think the final invoices will come in, it may end up being closer to $700,000, and we'll have to talk to our board about that as it happens. But we're pretty much right on. But where does this take us going forward? So, as we've talked about, it's a three-part process, and I'll really characterize it more as a four-part process. This is the first part. Is it feasible, or is feasibility indicated sufficiently enough that your elected board members say, you know, it seems compelling, I want to move forward, prepare me for eventually voting to move it forward. And that vote, in effect, requires a bona fide offer to buy the system. Expecting the company to say we are not for sale means that offer would be rejected. Then our board would move into a phase where they say, well, we think it's in the public interest to do so, therefore we're going to vote on a public resolution of necessity. Is it in the public's interest? And so, should our board choose to move in that direction, they need to be ready at that point in time to know the details when they make that decision that would carry them through to the bench trial and achieve success there. Because if you can't achieve success at the bench trial, you spend a bunch of money. Well, let's talk about your money, our money. So here's where we are in terms of getting to this point. At our board meeting on Monday, we will talk, and this will show up a little bit later, we'll talk a little bit more about additional scope of services to get us to the next phase, which is the right to take bench trial. If that's the end game, if you do not receive the right to take decision from the judge, and it's just a judge, it's a bench trial, then we may see us on the hook for another $3 to $6 million of our expenses and the company's expenses through that period of time with no further movement forward. The judge has ruled there is no public right to take. So that's what we're looking at. I would say that Mr. Bruno mentioned precarious financial position. We're not so precarious that we cannot afford to do that based on reserves we have in place and receipts expected to occur before this happens, but you should all know what's out there. If the judge says, yes, you do have the right to take, and you move forward, then it's a jury trial on just compensation. The exposure there, we think, depending on how long it lasts and what kind of legal wrangling occurs, if you achieve an outcome, for example, where the court rules that you didn't have a right to take, well, that was Part B. So that's done. If the jury verdict, though, at this point is far in excess of what all of our work was based on to say it's in the ratepayer's interest, and we think it's no longer in the ratepayer's interest, and we say, here, keep the keys to the system, then we're on the hook for our legal fees and quite possibly the company's legal fees. So that, our legal fees would probably be paid for out of pocket along the way, but their legal fees would be a sudden hit with that revelation that we really can't afford to take over the system. That's why in our minds, we'll be analyzing how much room do we have if the value comes out at $513 million or $600 million. Is there enough room that if a jury's even above that it's still in the ratepayer interest? If it's not, then we're kind of at that point yet again. So those are the things that we're going to be looking at. We don't know where that's going to lead us, but if you get the green light at each stage, it gets a little more expensive to go to the next stage and the next stage. And so just want us all to know what we're getting into. There are other financial risks, what I call trial by attrition or death by 1,000 cuts. In many of these transactions, everything is subject to a legal action. Suing over separate challenges, sue over the financing, sue over the authority of the district to do any of this, sue over the CEQA work, etc. There will be expert witnesses, and depending on discovery and depositions and where things are going, that can be more expensive or less expensive. And as I mentioned before, just getting to the bench trial, there's an interim phase, which will require additional scope of services and budget. And that relates to these things. In order for the board to really make an informed decision, we will need a more detailed operations plan. If you took it over, how would you operate it? Show me some details. Is it possible? Can you do it? We need some CEQA compliance, CEQA meaning environmental compliance, think of it that way. There are some boundary adjustments that will likely need to be made for the Local Area Formation Commission, which will require CEQA work. And then the acquisition itself could result in being designated a project subject to CEQA because of the nature of the system here versus some of the other examples, which were standalone systems where it's simply just a change in ownership. I mentioned the LAFCO process, but that takes some time to make the boundary adjustments. And then we have the question of formal appraisal, a bona fide offer to be rejected from a company that's not for sale. And then the findings of public necessity is really, our board would need to be fairly certain that this is in the public interest and that we have sufficient findings that going from their decision to move forward and start a condemnation action to actually getting in front of the judge, that we've already thought through what the judge is going to hear and whether those findings are sufficient to really prevail. So those are the things that we would need to look at if they choose to move forward. I think, as I mentioned, we will get to whether or not the board wants to move forward in the next two regularly scheduled board meetings. And then the vote on resolution of necessity, which requires a supermajority vote, so 5 out of 7. These other actions would just be typical business of the board at a majority vote, but the supermajority would be the actual decision to move forward and then follow that with a condemnation action in the courts. So timeline, the next board meeting a week from now, we'll discuss some more of these additional services. Just this week, my CFO and I just discussed it with Ref Tellis, there may be some additional work that would illuminate the process. And then likely we would ask the board for funds and scope and budget on December board meeting, leading to the ability to act sometime next summer. So that's where we're at. And that brings us to public comment with the direction of our chair.
I would like to make a note that if you have any written material that you wanted to leave for the board to review, you can leave it in the tray at the front when you do your speaker time. Thank you. 2 minutes. We're going to limit public speaking time to 2 minutes. I'm going to call the first 3 names, line up at the microphone in the center of the room, and then I will call the next person to join them at the back of the line. We'll start with Ron Weitzman, Alyssa Albert, and Michael Ibsen.
Good evening, and thank you for wonderful presentations by their consultant, by Dave Stolt. I'm Ron Weitzman, President of Water Ratepayers Association of the Monterey Peninsula. We've been meeting weekly since September 2010, before the CalAm project even got begun. I'm not here to criticize anything. Together with George and other people who have been parties to the proceeding on CalAm's project, I've written dozens of briefs, dozens of commentaries, attended dozens of meetings. In addition to our weekly Water Plus meetings, we also call ourselves Water Plus. So I'm going to give a little bit of background before I give an evaluation, to provide some substance maybe to the evaluation. I've taught dozens of courses in econometrics at advanced and introductory level in graduate schools of business, dozens of courses in statistics. My field is estimation and assessment. I've written dozens of articles in that field. And I want to say, for one thing, that when I read the report on the evaluation of demand, the estimation of demand, that David Stolt wrote, I was really impressed. I think that's a solid document, and it would be very hard to refute that. It's based on data, and he considers all the problems from every angle, and I think it would be a very difficult document for CalAm to refute. I certainly would support that and endorse it in public, as I am now. I think the presentations, not only of that report, but of the consultant, were excellent. It's a difficult topic, it's complex. I thought he presented it about as well as possibly could be done, and I really just want to say, in an affirmative way, I'm affirming this, and I thank you very much for everything you've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weitzman. Next in line is Mara McEntee. No, I'm sorry. The third person in line. All right, Ms. Albert, please come up. Mara McEntee, please go to the end of the speaker line. Thank you.
All right. Good evening. My name is Alyssa Albert. I'm a student at the California State University at Monterey Bay. In regards to Measure J, I am concerned about the financials that will be allocated for the measure if CalAm is bought and made into a public entity. I hope the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District will still put the same amount of funding towards ongoing, current, and relevant conservation projects, such as the protection of the steelhead fish and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At the end of the line, Kevin Tilden.
Yes, my name's Michael Ibsen. Are there any potential risks of regulatory penalties if the sale process causes a delay in the completion of the new water system? And secondly, if CalAm Water has not maintained plant and equipment and the sale proceeds, what recourse does the water district have to adjust the price, recover additional costs that were not foreseen in the feasibility study? Thank you.
Thank you. Next in line is Doug Cady.
Hello, my name is Mara McEntee. I am a fifth-year environmental studies student from California State University, Monterey Bay. And my question is, to what extent is it financially feasible for MPWD to buy out CalAm based on their proposed severance package, if there is a proposed severance package, and what would that severance package amount be? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, members of the board. My name is Kevin Tilden. I'm Vice President of California American Water. We appreciate you holding this forum tonight. With so much at risk, the public deserves opportunities to hear about this and weigh in. As I think you've all heard me say before, our company is not for sale. The only way this condemnation effort will go forward is if a court is persuaded it's in the public's best interest. Even in accepting the unrealistically low figure in your report, it would be the costliest eminent domain lawsuit in California history, and a lawsuit we believe the district is likely to lose. As Mr. Stolt pointed out, could be cost up to $20 million alone on attorney fees, and the district would not be just responsible for their fees, but ours as well. I think you've also heard me or our legal team say that the final sale price when condemnations are successful is usually 2 to 3 times the first number the public agency puts out there. So we fully expect you to come out with a number between 400 and 600 million, and we fully expect the price to be between $1 billion and $1.5 billion. The history is that's how these work. I found it interesting your consultant looked at 7 comparables. 5 of those were systems, small trouble systems that our company bought. When you're doing comps, a price that a willing seller and a willing buyer agree to pay each other is totally different than a price a court award and a jury awards a seller when their property is being condemned. And certainly that should have been the comparable set you looked at instead of those with a willing buyer and a willing seller. Similarly, just a small thing, but I think the cost of water rights was less than $3,000, and I think you all know the recent comp for water rights sales here on the Peninsula is $250,000. So this $530 million maybe work out financially to make there be no bill increase, but we don't think is anywhere based in reality. During the Measure J campaign, takeover proponents repeatedly said if the price was too high, there would be no buyout, and Mr. Stoll said that tonight. But this report hasn't said at what price would be too high, that there would be a bill increase. You need to know, is that $703 million, $682 million? Because you need to know when to say stop, and you've not been given that information tonight. Your report, which by its own admission is not an appraisal and is full of flawed assumptions, makes a bunch of. May I have another minute, or would you like me to stop, Chair?
I'd like you to stop. We have
Thank
a lot
you.
of speakers tonight. Thank you, Kevin. The next person I have in line is Doug Cady, followed by Joshua Norden and Brian J.
Hello, my name's Doug Cady. I live in Pebble Beach. I've lived on the peninsula a large portion of my life. A couple of things in the article in the Herald, it mentioned that taken away from the cost by having public ownership is that you don't have to pay property taxes or income taxes. That's maybe a savings to the ratepayer, but that's revenue that won't be coming into local and state governments. So that when you're considering the overall benefit to the community, that isn't really a saving, because either the services that those other entities, government entities provide go down, or they have to come up with the revenue to replace it somewhere else. And the second thing I wanted to mention was one of the benefits of public ownership is there are some perverse things that happen in private ownership. For example, when the PUC sets the rate of return, if a private company like Cal-Am can move costs to operation and maintenance, they get to deduct it the year that those costs occur. Whereas if they do capital expenditures, they have to amortize it over time. And so it's to a benefit of a private entity to try to patch up the system and keep it going with O&M rather than to make capital improvements. So a public entity can look at more of a public benefit of, does it make sense to put the 412th patch on that mile of pipeline, or does it make sense to replace it? Whereas from Cal-Am's aspect, it will almost always make economic sense to put another patch on it. So thank you.
Thank you. I have as the next speaker Joshua Norden, followed by Brian J., and then Rylan Mesa.
You're skipping people who got in line ahead of the people you call.
But the only people in line are the people that I call.
Oh, okay.
This is not open mic.
I'm sorry.
Hi, good evening. My name is Joshua Norden. I'm a senior at CSUMB. And I just wanted to bring to the board's attention how this will affect those who are not as financially established as most of the affluent majority in this area. Definitely as a member of that bracket, I do feel that this may offset the costs more and making it kind of more difficult for people, younger people, to maintain a lifestyle in this area. But yes, that's all I wanted to bring to the board's attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Adam Scow at the end of the line, please.
Hi, my name is Brian Jung. I'm a senior at CHMB, and thank you for having this event. And my question to the board is, where is the funding going to come from to try to pay off all the debt from the projects or the project of buying out Cal-Am? Thank you.
Thank you. Are you Rylan Missa?
Nope.
Have I called your name yet? Then please have a seat until I call your name. Thank you so much, sir. The end of the line, Brianna Arroyo. Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Rylan Mesa from CSUMB. I'm a resident of Marina. My question to you is, if Cal-Am is not interested in being bought for the price that you guys have proposed, what is your borders to the extent of what you'll pay? Thank you.
Thank you. At the end of the line will be Alexander Buzigas.
Thank you, Board Chair, and thank you to the Board of Directors and the staff for doing a great job. I think this is about 41 years in the making since the passage of the 1978 legislation that created the Water Management District, where it expressly grants the powers to this agency to purchase the private water system, and notes that it's in the general welfare to manage the groundwater and to recharge groundwater. The state legislature had that vision in 1978. The community overcame $3 million in spending by Cal-Am to pass Measure J last year to finally make this a dream come true. This is a wonderful day. We want to thank the staff for their job. We are seeing the problem with private utilities in California. Let's talk about PG&E another night. I would love to see a similar proposal done here. But we also need to be very careful about the valuation. I think one of the lessons of Felton was that they probably shouldn't have settled, they should have gone to court. The system was in way worse shape. Cal-Am did such a miserable job running it to fail that we have to really pay attention to that, and one of the speakers said that, so really want to advise you there. Let's really watch what's going on at the California Public Utilities Commission the next 4 or 5 months. We need to watch them like a hawk and ensure that the public interest will be protected. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Last in line, Brian Clark.
Hello, my name is Brianna Royan. I'm a student at CSU Monterey Bay. I'd like to thank you all for allowing me to come up here this evening. Rather than having a public comment, I'd like to ask a question. If the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District does purchase Cal-Am, will Cal-Am be rolling over their low-income? Will Cal-Am's low-income program be rolled over or adapted? Thank you.
Last in line, John Tilley.
Hello, I'm a CSUMB environmental studies student, and I believe that
Your name?
Oh, I'm Alex Buzik, and I believe that the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District should have ownership of the Monterey water system over Cal-Am, because not only will there be lower corporate and administrative costs, but also lower taxes for residents and the elimination of rate regulatory expenses. Thank you.
Thank you. Last in
evening,
line,
Board.
Brian Lanoux.
Hi, I'm Brian Clark. How do you do?
Brian Clark.
Thank you for your time. So as we know, the first generation of Cal-Am and the desal plant was on track, and then it came derailed over conflict of interest over bidding of contracts. And so 14,000 pages of EIRs later, it's recommended that it goes forward, i.e. with the desal. So now we have the fox in the hen house saying, well, we want to take over Cal-Am, but recent rulings in the state court said, well, in fact, no, you're not going to save money, so in fact you cannot take over, eminent domain does not apply, and the county, the eminent domain pursuer was in fact made to pay, I think, $6 million back to the utility. So Monterey Peninsula Water Management District now presents a new report and says we do not need desal. We don't need desal because, in fact, Monterey Peninsula Monterey Management District wearing two hats. Are we going to be for desal, or are we going to be for our own eminent domain? So Monterey Peninsula, the Monterey newspapers called Monterey Peninsula Water Management District the red-headed stepchild in round number 1, the first desal plan. So that didn't happen. So Marine and Water Management District did 5 lawsuits, lost them all. Now we have the Coastal Commission has put on the vote, which is going up this week, off till March of next year about the desal plan. So it's put off for another 6 months. So Monterey Peninsula Water Management District produced a report that says we do not need desal. So they want to run the company. Now they're saying that desal is not necessary. Then they said, in fact, we can run desal because we do this right now. Well, how will you run the desal plant? We'll just hire Cal-Am employees. So there's an extreme conflict of interest. Extreme conflict of interest.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Thank you.
Last in line, Michael DeLapia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members. My name is John Tilley, co-chair of the Coalition of Peninsula Businesses. And I just want to reference the mission statement for the district, which is a sustainable water system. That is, from my view, the overarching goal you should have in these deliberations. And I would discourage you from supplanting that with the idea of public ownership. The idea of stripping away the water supply project that was agreed upon by the district and many other people over years of work, stripping away the desal plant to make it more affordable, in my view, doesn't follow the mission of the district. So please review your mission statement, and thank you for your good work.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley. Last in line, Robert Harding.
Good evening. My name is Brian Leneve. I have one question, and regarding the desal plant, it looks like the budget shows $92 million put in there for the desal plant, and the expo cost a lot more than that. So did you do an analysis of what would happen if the desal plant goes through and you have to finance the whole desal plant? The second question is, Dave did a very good job about showing some of the other pitfalls, some of the other costs that could happen. I would like to see some money put out to those numbers as to what could happen if CalAm delays, what happens if the suit doesn't go through. How much money are we talking about that we would be on the hook for a failed attempt? Thank you.
Thank you. Looking for Michael DeLapia, followed by Robert Harding, followed by Shannon Skidmore.
Good evening, Mike DeLappa at Landwatch Monterey County, and really delighted to be here tonight and to finally see that the numbers pencil out for the feasible buyout of CalAm by the Water District. We often hear a lot of opinions from people without any numbers, so it's really refreshing to finally see some good numbers. Landwatch supports the public buyout because it's in the public interest. What makes that absolutely clear is that CalAm continues to advocate for the most costly and the most risky alternative to water, that's desal, than to the less expensive and more socially just expansion of Pure Water Monterey. Again, the numbers make this really clear. Desalinated water is going to be 3 to 5 times more expensive than the expansion of Pure Water Monterey. And under certain circumstances, it could be way more expensive. If you look back, it could be 5 to 10 times more expensive. But you do need to look beyond the numbers, and this relates to the question of public benefit and why municipalization of water supply in this case makes a lot of sense. Why is CalAm pursuing desal? Because it's only by investing in and building expensive capital assets that their shareholders see their return on investment increase. That's really clear. Note that we're already going to have to pay $92 million for a paper desal plant that will likely never produce a drop of water and no one wants. Take that in, 20% of the purchase price is a paper desal plant. That is outrageous. CalAm is pursuing that again because it's in their shareholders' best interest. So this really comes down to a very simple question. Who do you want to benefit from water investments? Public ratepayers or private shareholders? Voters have already made that clear, and I hope you'll respect the voters' decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lama. Last in line, Melody Chrisbach.
Hi, I'm Robert Harding. I am a CSUMB student, although I'm not here in representing CSUMB in any way. I'm a private citizen in Seaside. I am for this acquisition for a public interest. I believe public control over their water rights is better than having a private company in control of it, because that's a private company and their interests are with them, not with the public. And that concerns me greatly as I'm learning about this today. And then on top of that, I read the full report that you put out, and I really like the idea that it's just the government taking over control. There isn't an outside contractor that you're putting in, it's just the government looking at it. Even though the rates are lower and the risks are extremely high with doing this, I think the reward could be worth it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Last in line, Ashley Smith.
Hey, hi. My name is Shannon Skidmore. I'm enrolled in the Water Resource Management Policy class at California State University, Monterey Bay. I would like to reiterate the findings of the continued ownership and operation projection completed by Raftellus Financial Consultants. That district operation would cost about $13.6 million or 11.9% less per year than Caltrans' current operation. I urge the board to consider these financial benefits alongside voter-approved Measure J, which requires the district to secure and maintain public ownership of all water production, storage, and delivery systems, assets, and infrastructure in its territory, if and when feasible. The path may be long and intricate, but we do have the ability to move towards a future of water resource management that is endorsed by Monterey County voters. Thank you.
Thank you. Last in line, Paul Bruno.
Melody Chrislock, Public Water Now. Thank you, MPWMD. Thank you so much. Public Water Now and the 24,000 voters that passed Measure J are deeply gratified at the results of this feasibility study. What Public Water Now said all along during both Measure O and Measure J campaigns came to be true. Public ownership will lower our water costs. So when CalAm stands up here and says, oh, it might cost you $20 million in legal fees, they neglect completely to point out that right now on our bills there are $35 million in CalAm's failed projects. Much of that is their other failed desal projects. You can see why CalAm wants this desal plant. The profit on this desal over 30 years is $120 million. That's a lot of motivation for CalAm. You can also see why Public Water Now is fighting to get the facts out, comparing the desal plant with the Monterey, Pier 1 Monterey expansion, which would only cost us $190 million. You could almost cover the whole cost of the project over 30 years with just CalAm's profit alone. CalAm's actual 30-year cost on this desal plant, $1.2 billion on your water bills. What community would choose $1.2 billion over $190 million when both projects will satisfy our water demand? So, thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Chrislock. Last in line, David Chardemoy.
Hi, Ashley Smith, Cal State Monterey Bay. As previously mentioned, I just want to reiterate the purpose that you do state in the PowerPoint tonight of sustainable practices for water management. Moving forward, you did fail to mention any information providing the sustainable practices for pulling, if you take over CalAm in the long run. And from a public perspective, it may be deemed that the sustainable water practices may be the most important factor in keeping water in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Last in line, Madeline Smith.
Good evening, Paul Bruno, resident of Monterey. It's been a long path getting here, but here we are. I've been doing this now 30 years, involved in the water supply issues on the Monterey Peninsula. I want to stress that the public interest criteria is a very high hurdle. Very high hurdle. Who here really believes in the efficiency of government over private industry? I know I don't. Well, these people apparently like going to the DMV. So, let's talk operational costs. 8.9% savings. I'm going to tell you, those are rose-colored glasses that you're looking through. Look at the disclaimers. The disclaimer says, quote, as is often the case, there will likely be differences between the actual projected results, and those differences may be material. I think there's some material differences here. The other thing is there's no pilot. There's no payment in lieu of taxes. What does that mean? Some of your savings is basically saying we're going to take the money from the cities. Those taxes go somewhere, and those taxes have to be made up by somebody, unless we're just going to close some schools or maybe tell the fire department, answer every other call. So think about that. If you're calling that savings, they're not savings. The jury trial exposure, huge, $15 to $20 million. That would bankrupt the district. I know the numbers. That will bankrupt this district. You cannot afford to take that risk. And finally, let's talk about the big number, $513 million. That's not the big number. That is a floor. That's not the ceiling. That's a floor. There are no severance damages in there. It says to be determined. I can't believe they couldn't throw at least something in there. That $513 million excludes severance damages, and we know that severance damages are real in this circumstance. To not include that is malpractice. So it's going to be much higher. much higher. Thank you for having us here tonight. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno. Last in line, Peter Montier.
Good evening. My name is David Chardevoin. I have a residence in Monterey. By way of background, I spent 22 years in positions having responsible charge of negotiating acquisitions and divestitures of water systems across the United States. Included are 18 transactions, the purchase of 5 publicly owned systems, a purchase of 9 investor-owned systems, divestiture of 3 systems to public agencies, and 1 utility. So I've done a lot of research on this too in that 22 years. One of the divestitures I negotiated happened to be here in California, and it was to a public authority, and it was the Guerneville water system. The purchase price was $6.5 million based on RCNLD, and the rate base was $3 million. The preliminary valuation and cost of service report, I believe, undervalues the takeover cost of the Monterey system in that, as a minimum, it dismisses the RCNLD valuation approach in its entirety. It dismisses compensation for advances and contributions and severance costs, and apparently, I learned tonight, it does not include depreciation, and depreciation is used to have a fund for replacement of plant down the road when it wears out. So if you're not putting money away every year for depreciation, you're mortgaging your system. I asked this board to find out how many Class A utility takeovers in California have resulted in lower rates for customers. In my experience, there are none. There are no more anywhere that I know of, except one in Nassau, where the property taxes were 55%. If I may just conclude, we customers shouldn't automatically drink the Kool-Aid by accepting Section 6, Paragraph 6, which proposes a revenue requirement decrease of about 12%.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker I have is Madeline Smith. And Peter Montier then, Scott Dick, followed by Jamie Skillen. No, Peter Montier first.
Good evening, Peter Montier, PG Chamber. The district was created to manage our water supply, not necessarily to own and operate an entire system. That the district would consider financing over $500 million to take over the system and dramatically expand its employee workforce and CalPERS obligations to do so seems risky because the valuation numbers provided in this report should not be considered a formal appraisal, as the consultant noted. The system's final value and your bill at the very end could be quite higher considering it's already been appraised once before at almost $1 billion. Most public agencies and municipalities are under pressure to pay their PERS obligations with unfunded liabilities far exceeding their annual budgets. The district already has this problem. Acquiring and operating a water system would expand it significantly, and at some point those costs would have to be built back into the rates in the future. So looking to the future, I think the district should be careful with this and proceed with extreme caution. Thanks.
Thank you. Last in line, Michael Bear.
Good evening. My name is Scott Dick. I represent the 1,300 small business entrepreneurs in the Monterey County Association of Realtors. I'll make this quick. I was digging through our archives and found the 2005 Santa Cruz County Board resolution and paperwork that valued, I'm happy I'm not the first one to invoke Felton here, found that the initial system, the estimated price for the water system was $3.3 million. That's the official board report that came out when they were doing the resolution. That was in 2005 and 2006. The water district at the time, SLVWD, offered then, probably after the formal appraisal, they offered $7.6 million, more than double to CalAm. Eventually, it was sold for $13.4 million, and there was no eminent domain. I noticed the caveat as well. It says the valuation assessment can be characterized as a preliminary desktop assessment, should not be considered a formal appraisal. If this doubles or even goes a half more, we're talking 750 million. That's 3/4 of $1 billion. So it's a caution that basic desktop assessment may not get us where we need to get. So, and I have that complete board report if you're interested, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, my next speaker is Jamie Skillen, followed by Michael Bear, followed by Peter Keeson? Okay. Oh, Peter Kaiser, sorry. If I have not called your name, feel free to sit down until I do so. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Skillen, and I am a fourth-year environmental studies student from CSUMB. I would just like to voice my support currently for the Pure Water Monterey expansion for the benefit of both the customers and the environment. If CalAm continues with this desal plans, we will be flooding our already limited groundwater basin with seawater, and this would push us further away from a sustainable water system that I know the voters are eager for. Thank you.
Thank you. Last in line will be Dan Presser.
Michael Bear, thank you for the excellent report. There are some unanswered questions that several speakers have raised, like severance. I'd be interested to know what are the obstacles to getting to those numbers, and hopefully you have some time going forward to get even more focused on what those numbers are. I have an interesting question. So you mentioned roughly $25 million in legal costs between the two court cases. And I'm just curious, when CalAm has those legal fees, who pays for those? Doesn't that come out of the ratepayer? Aren't we already paying the legal fees on our bill? And the pipes, you talk about valuation. Didn't we already buy that? How much did the shareholders pay to build that system versus the ratepayers? Another point, so in the weekly in Pinecone this week, they're saying, oh, the appraisal's out, the paperwork's out. It's $513 million. Well, the way I read it was a range between, starting this kind of base around 245 million up to 513 million. Mr. Bruno says 513 is the floor. I think you need to be very aggressive. They're going to play hardball as best they can, and I think you need to too, and I think you will. But can you say, hey, how about a credit on those legal fees? Ratepayers already paid those legal fees. And, pushing back on the bias of the Pinecone and the weekly, 513 isn't the evaluation. That is, I don't want to say worst case scenario, but that is with some questions about how much we have to pay for certain things. So I just really encourage you to be as aggressive as you can and do the promotion, the PR, to push back against misinformation.
Thank you. Peter Kaiser, followed by Dan Presser, followed by Anna Thompson. I will call the next person to go to the end of the line at the conclusion of each speaker.
Peter Kaiser, thank you for being here tonight. Just some number crunching. If we think of it as $513 million for the base cost for the buyout, and then the interest maybe $615 million, and then at 1.12 billion, divide that by 40,000 ratepayers, it's estimated about $28,000 per ratepayer household. Now, I wish when you show the slides again, you should give those kind of numbers. In other words, does each ratepayer want to pay $28,000 to buy a private corporation, maybe even forced through eminent domain? And by the way, I think Measure J was flawed. There should have been two parts. One part, a feasibility study, and how's that going to be paid for? Is it going to cost $700,000? And then a second part where the voters, all ratepayers, get a chance to vote if they want to pay $30,000 to buy this corporation. And by the way, if CalAm is the desal plant's included, it goes to $2.4 billion, and that would be $62,000 per ratepayer. If you divide it to 2.4 by 40,000. So you need to have those on the screens, the actual cost per ratepayer family for the buyout in thousands of dollars, and then you can divide that by the 30 years of amortization and so forth. So that's important. And by the way, I forgot to say earlier that we've been asking for gray water to be treated in Marina and sent back to our houses to be used as gray water to water our plants. Potable water is maybe 8% of use. So if we wouldn't need all these fancy things and buyouts and desals if you just years ago kept our local plants, did the gray water, sent the water back to our houses. We water our plants for 80-90% of the use of the water, and then, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Last in line, Monica Kim.
Hi there. Good evening. I'm Dan Presser. And before I came here, I was in advertising. And in advertising, we talked about the age of me. And unfortunately, I think we're still there after 30 years. But it's about time that we look beyond the me and go to the we. And if we do that, what happens in 30 years? We've stopped at 30 years in all your discussions. At the end of 30 years, you guys, we the people, own Cal-Am. And there is no other fees other than just running that company, running that business, running the water for the public, in the name of the public. So after 30 years, it's ours. It belongs to we the people. And then there are very little expenditures beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you. Last in line will be Tammy Jennings.
Good evening. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm so gratified that we are going to be able to purchase this Cal-Am infrastructure. Anyhow, the reason I want to point out the most is that Cal-Am is a corporation, and their interest is not our welfare. Their interest is the profits and growing of their business. And there is a lot of value to be given to having control of our water system and the future of our system. And it's very critical that we don't have it in the hands of a for-profit corporation who they mislead us all the time. They even mislead us tonight, telling us that income taxes go to our local benefit, which they're not. They're going to New Jersey, which I believe that what I'm saying is true, unless I'm misinformed. So also they say that we make always the wrong estimates. Well, Felton buyout, they estimated to be at 46 million, but instead actually end up being purchased for $11 million. No corporations has the benefit of the public. They have the interest of their shareholders, and they are always be able to choose whatever gives them the most profits, and that's why they're choosing the desal plant. The desal plant will cost us a lot. Also, I want to point out that the gentleman before me said that we have to think about the future, not just the current one, and to leave a legacy for our future generations here. Just imagine what it would have been like if we had purchased that 30 years ago. Now would be all ours. Why do we have to pay those profits? We're paying for all the costs and all the liabilities as well.
Thanks, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your great job.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Monica Kim, followed by Tammy Jennings, followed by Kevin Dayton. If you filled out a speaker card, I will call your name. Feel free to sit down.
I'm Monica Kim. I'm a child of refugees. We as refugees crammed ourselves in an RV with 10 people. We had nothing after arriving in Marina. The Marina beaches were the only reason why my family did not starve and climbed out of poverty. Cal-Am's desal will destroy 7 acres of our beaches when erosion occurs in the place that Cal-Am is trying to put their desal. It will block our public access in the future. CalAm is planning to destroy our livelihood in an entire ethnic community by destroying the only potable water source and the sand dunes in Marina. I'm tired of everyone talking about money when lives are being destroyed by CalAm's project, when entire sources of water are going to get corrupted and destroyed in Marina and Fort Ord to service a more affluent community. That is the subject where people are being destroyed, where their source of water is being destroyed. It took millions of years to get groundwater. And the desal pipeline is going to destroy the life of Marina. And people cannot understand that. They keep talking about money when it's about the lives being destroyed in an entire community. Their dependency on that potable water is going to go away or be emptied. So once more, as a representative of refugees, of the ethnic community, we as Marina should protect our groundwater by supporting the expansion project that does not touch groundwater, that does not touch the ocean, that is recyclable, that uses uses less carbon dioxide to produce our water. It's better for our community.
Thank you. The next speaker at the end of the line will be Jessica Skaggs.
Hi, my name is Tammy Jennings. I want to thank you all for making this presentation understandable for the layperson. It was very straightforward. Thank you. Thank you. I want to make my comment. I believe that things like water and air that we need to live should not be provided for by a for-profit entity. Sorry. Anyway, for profit entities, CalAm's rate of return of 7.61% that the CPUC has approved time and time again is not fair. For people that live on fixed incomes like Social Security, when and if we ever get cost of living increases, they're like 2%. How are we supposed to keep up with CalAm's 7.61% profit? My water bill has tripled since 2011. I can't afford life-sustaining water, and I'm on CalAm's low-income program.
Thank you. Ma'am, would you please not stand in the speaker line? If you filled out a card, I will call your name. Last speaker in line, or the last one in the line to be Susan Gabriel.
Kevin Dayton, Government Affairs Liaison, Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. There have been some comments tonight about the business community, not positive. I think the business community does have some reason to be concerned. One thing is, if it's inevitable, you had last year, basically our electric supply was taken over by the government for the most part. There is still a choice to use PG&E, but as you probably know, almost everyone now within the Monterey Peninsula has Monterey Bay Community Power as our electric provider. And what I say about this is the success of a publicly owned utility depends on the quality of the people who are governing it. There are some people who are going to govern a public utility saying we want to provide the best rates for the ratepayers and provide a reliable service. Then there are others who say we can use the power of public utilities to change the world in our community. And there's no question in my mind that there are some people who are looking at this as the opportunity to continue population contraction on the Monterey Peninsula, hinder economic growth, try to get some of those tourists and visitors away, close the military bases, and it's out there. Yes, this is a real agenda for some, and they have a quality of life issue. And as the business community looks at this takeover attempt, they're going to say, what does this mean for business in the long run? Am I going to be able to expand and hire people? Or is this an effort to try to keep things as they are for somebody's idea of what the future vision should be for the Monterey Peninsula? And we're going to, there are many, I don't think there are many business people tonight checking this out, small business people saying, what's going on with this? There are a lot of people very enthusiastic about government control of water supply. But how will this affect the economy in the future? What will the military say when they're looking at closing the bases, when they have their BRAC and they say, well, it looks like the water, it's very controversial here. What's going to happen? Who are these people who are going to be running it? Be careful.
Thank you, Mr. Dayton. Third in line will be George Paul.
Hi, my name is Jessica Skaggs, and I'm a student at CSUMB. I was just mostly curious that if the Monterey Water District was to acquire this from Cal-Am, if they will be adopting the many efforts by Cal-Am in terms of conservation projects. Also, if you guys don't plan on going forward with desal as one of your projects, what you would be doing in terms of the sustainable water practices and the diminishing water supply within the area. Thank you.
Third in line will be Eleanor Markanian. I'm looking for Susie Gabry.
Hello, my name is Susie Gabry and I'm from Pacific Grove. I don't know why every time somebody from Cal-Am's side speaks, I feel threatened. They're threatening us. Next thing, 85% of the nation has public water. Why can't we? Why shouldn't we? The next thing is that Cal-Am's slanted wells is not done anywhere else. This is the first project. This is their experiment on our expense. The other thing I wanted to talk about is that it's not just the price of desal. Just think about the environmental impact it will have. It's horrendous. The amount of energy that it will use to produce water, and the brine, the salt water that it will create. What are they going to do with that? Put it back in the ocean? Kill every animal in it? Haven't we done enough to this environment? Thank you.
Thank you. Third in line, Kevin Weaver.
Hi, I'm George Paul from Blue Valley Group. I have a question for Mr. Mastracchio regarding the estimated total cost of ownership regarding his presentation.
You can ask your question.
I was surprised to see that the cost of district operation is less than contractors. Does that include also pensions, benefits, health insurance, and labor costs as well? Yes, it does. Thank you.
Third in line will be Phil Wellerman.
My name is Eleanor Markarian. I'm a student at California State University, Monterey Bay. I'm concerned about the environmental impact of the desal plant. I urge the board to place the environmental impact report at a higher priority when considering the future management of the desal plant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kevin Weaver. I'm a senior at CSUMB. Regarding the Cal-Am desal project, I'm personally concerned with the financial feasibility of water access for low-income families. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there, Phil Wellman, Public Water Now. The numbers that have been discussed here tonight can certainly be debated, and they should be debated. But one thing that can't be debated is the skyrocketing rates that the people in this community have had to pay over the last 20 years. That can't be. And what we did a year ago when we discovered just exactly how bad it was in this community, as we pushed through working with Public Water Now, we were able to get a measure on the ballot and to inform the public in this area just exactly how bad things were, to wake them up collectively to just how bad the situation was in this community. And that got us to a 12-point win over a $3 million campaign that Cal-Am mounted. Now here we are today with some really bright folks and an incredibly competent human being that's rode roughshod over this process. And I couldn't be prouder to be a member of this community and see what's going on around here. It's really fantastic to see. But we've got a road ahead of us, not going to be easy. The road behind us was not easy, but great things take work. And I know we can get there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight and for taking the time to provide us your insight on this report. I'd like to thank our consultant for coming down and doing the actual presentation. I look forward to seeing you all at our meeting Monday night, 6 p.m. And with that, we are adjourned.